Welcome, everybody. My name is Ann Dolan, and today we're talking about the roadmap to college, the SAT and ACT. For the last 20 years, my tutors and I have been helping kids prepare for these tests to have greater options for college admissions. Today, we're going to answer three questions. Which test should I take? Which one is better, the SAT or ACT? When should my student take it? And lastly, what's the best way to prepare? So you can see this is a survey of college counselors that are looking at kids' applications at their colleges, the important factors in determining admissions. Far and away, grades are the most important factors. Grades specifically in college prep classes. That's followed by how many courses in AP, IB, or dual enrollment program kids are taking. And then those two factors of grades and strength of curriculum are followed by test scores on the SAT and ACT. So right out of the gate, these three things are the most important ways for kids to gain entrance. That's followed by counselor and teacher recommendations, the essay or the writing sample, extracurricular activities, and then at the very, very bottom, you can see only 9% of admissions folks are looking at subject test scores. They're just not that important anymore, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So what happens in ninth grade? Well, in ninth grade, kids should be focused on grades, not on testing. Now, in some school districts, they have the opportunity to take the PSAT in ninth grade, and they should. But other than that, they should just be working hard on getting good grades. In 10th grade, they can take the PSAT again in October, and they should, but no prep is needed. They really just need this information to see how they might do on the test. But grades, again, are the most important things kids should be working towards. Now, in the spring of their 10th grade year, the summer after that, or the fall of their 11th grade year, that's when kids really want to start going down a path to either the SAT or the ACT. The reason is kids don't need to prepare for both tests. It turns out to be a lot more stressful and a lot more time consuming. So before they start even considering it, they need to determine which test they're going to take. They can do this two ways. They can come to a practice test. We offer these for free in the community, and you can find the dates and locations on our website, which is ectutoring.com. Go to the test prep tab and pull it down to mock tests, and you can see them there. They're in Falls Church, Virginia. Kids could also theoretically sit for a real SAT and ACT, but we don't recommend it because it tends to be a lot more stressful, and then that's on their record as well. So let's talk about what happens with these scores. When you have a practice SAT and a practice ACT, we can then put those into a concordance table. The concordance table tells us a couple of things. But number one is which test is the stronger test for the student. For about 1/3 of kids, they perform better on either the SAT or the ACT. But for 2/3 of kids, there really is no difference. It's really personal preference. So we always ask the kids, which one did you like better? Where did you feel most comfortable? And kids will say, I liked the pace of the ACT. I like the pace of the SAT. But the questions were a lot harder for me, and I didn't really understand it. So for me, the ACT feels better. Or kids will say, oh man, that ACT is way too fast. So they say all different things, but their opinion, their comfort level is a factor if there is no difference in their scores. This takes time up front, but it can be a huge benefit down the line, especially the junior year when kids don't have a ton of time. They're stressed. They're working hard on their grades. So this cuts down on prep time by just focusing on one test. And every college in America accepts both the SAT and ACT, and they really have no preference. They don't favor one over the other. So let's look at the differences. The SAT, it's considered to be a power test. There are fewer questions, but they're wordier. They require more critical thinking and analysis. There's a narrower scope of skills. For example, in math, it's mostly focused on algebra and algebra 2, not so much on geometry. But the difficulty in this test is actually in the interpretation, the analysis. You kind of have to figure out, what are they asking me in both reading and math? Now, the ACT, it's considered to be a speed test. There are more questions, but they're shorter. They're straightforward, more like school. In fact, it's often considered to be the student-friendly test. Now, there's a broader scope of skills, for example, more geometry and a little bit more advanced math, but the difficulty isn't necessarily in the questions, it's more in the pace, in the speed. You have to go at a pretty good clip to get finished. And it's interesting across the country, in our area in Virginia and even in the Northeast, the SAT always had a stronghold. But in 2011, the ACT administered more tests across the country than the SAT. But just last month, the SAT took back market share. In our area, about half the kids take the SAT and half the kids take the ACT. So the SAT is not the prevalent test like it used to be when we were growing up. Now, let's take a look at the SAT. There are two sections. Half of it is math, and there's a calculator part and no calculator, a total of 800 points. There's an evidence-based reading and writing section. This has reading comprehension and writing grammar. That's also 800 points. So kids can receive a total of about 1,600 points. There's also a writing sample, but it's optional, and it's not part of the 1,600 score. This test is 3 hours and 50 minutes. Now, the ACT is different. 4 sections: math, you can use a calculator; reading comprehension, writing grammar, and then also science. But it's not the science you might be thinking of, or the science kids are often scared of. It's actually looking at charts and graphs and interpreting information. It's actually kind of language-based. Kids can earn a total of 36 points. So the scores on each section are averaged together, and that's how you get your composite score. Just to put it in focus, the average ACT score across the country is a 21. In Virginia, it's a 23, and in Fairfax County, it's a 24. So that helps to put it in perspective a little bit. There's also an optional writing section, but it's not average, just like the SAT, not average in the total score. And this test is 3 hours and 35 minutes long. Now, the junior year, what do? Well, you want to take your first test in the winter or in the spring, but you really don't have to take it too early. We see a lot of parents and kids wanting to take very early fall tests, and it's just not best practice. And the reason is, statistically speaking, kids peak in the spring of their junior year. The reason is they're older, they're more mature, and they've had more curriculum under their belt. Now, in the spring of junior year, sometimes kids will also consider subject tests. These are in May or June. It's after a student has taken, say, chemistry. They can take this subject test, and some schools want subject tests, but they're really on their way out. If you're not sure, look at the websites of the schools you want to apply to, and you can see if they recommend or require a subject. So let's decide on that first date. So the ACT coming up. December 8th, February 9th, April 13th, June 5th, and July 13th. So you want to pick 2 dates, whether you're taking the SAT or the ACT, and you want to pair them together. For example, common ACT dates are February and April. The reason is you take the test in February, you get your score back 2 weeks later, you prep a little bit more, and then you take it again in April. Or kids will take it in April and June. That's super popular as well. They have a little bit more time, and this is good. So again, same thing. They're going to take it, see what their score is, understand their weakness, refine a little bit, and take it again. Most students take the test 2 and 3 times. So you always want to pair those dates, find your 2 dates, and then you can have a 3rd date in your back pocket if you need it. And that's often the fall of the senior year. We're happy to help you pair your dates, pick them for your child, because there are a lot of factors. For example, what math is your child taking? What is their schedule like? Do they have, are they playing a spring sport, for example? How diligent are they in preparing? How much time do they need to improve their score? Are they a low scorer? Are they a high scorer from the baseline? How much do they need to improve? All those factors are really important in determining test date. But really, it's helpful to work with a professional instead of just, deciding on a date, because you don't want to over-test your child and have them take it too many times, especially when they're not ready. So you want to plan backwards. Once you figure out what that first date is, that's when you want to figure out, all right, I'm going to need probably 2 to 4 months to prepare. Maybe you don't even need to prepare at all. If you're already a really high scorer and you're already at the very top of the schools you want to get to, their range, You may not need to prepare. You just need to go get a book and work on your own a little bit. But that's not the case for most students. So if they don't have that much ground to make up to improve, they might need a shorter time frame. Or sometimes parents will call us 2 months out. They just don't have time. So, we have to do the best we can and get them ready. But oftentimes parents will call a little bit earlier and they have more time. So for example, some kids might need 4 or even 5 months to prep. That's a long time, but 4 is typically a good amount of time because they can work once a week. They can do some homework. You don't want to try to squish in too much prep at the last minute. That doesn't work. Kids improve their scores by doing a little bit every week and allowing it to absorb into their brain. And that's the best way to improve, not all at one time. It's like cramming for a test. The long-term retention isn't there. Let's look at score ranges. So these are schools that report the range of the students coming in their freshman year. These were last year's scores for the mid 50th percentile range. So for UVA, a very, very, very competitive school, the SAT is between 1320 and 1520, and the ACT between 31 and 34. Christopher Newport, SAT 1150 and 1310, ACT between 23 and 27. So big difference there, but it helps you to see based on your child's baseline where they need to grow. 4 ways to practice. You can buy a book and practice independently. Great for that student who is super self-motivated and might not need to improve much at all. Practice online. There's lots of free resources. The SAT partners with Khan Academy. The ACT also has the ACT Academy Naviance, which is a program that many high schools use for helping kids determine colleges. That has some prep as well. Kids can also take a group class. These are usually with multiple students, maybe 20, and you cover a little bit of everything. Or you could work with a tutor, and that's what we do. We help kids. We take their baseline, their practice test, and we determine, all right, what is it with what sections do we need to improve the most? I'll talk about that in a moment about working from weakness. And what is it within that section you need to focus on? So for some kids in math, they actually are really strong in certain areas, like solving equations, but they're not so great in other areas like determining angles. So it's super focused, and working with a tutor can actually save you time because it's a little bit faster because it's just more customized. So I mentioned, looking at those areas for improvement. When you're working with kids in test prep, one thing I always knew as a teacher that I want to find my students' strengths and work from their area of natural ability, but that's not the case in test preparation. You want to figure out what's their weakest area and build on that, because that's how they improve their score the most. So you do it 3 ways. One is test-taking strategies. A test-taking strategy, it can be a lot of things. It could be like, how long should I spend on each question? Or, oh, how do I do these grid-ins on the math SAT? Or what's process of elimination and how do I apply it to this type of question? It's also content review. So for example, in the reading section or the writing section, a lot of kids are good writers, but they haven't had a ton of practice in traditional grammar. And that's something we often have to go over the rules with the kids. Or there's certain areas in math that they're really not getting because I haven't seen it in a while. That's content review. But the best way to improve scores is through simulated full-length practice tests. And a simulated test is basically, in standardized conditions, taking that test, a practice test, and these are retired tests, so they're from the ACT or from the College Board, and seeing, having the child, improve their pacing strategies, improve their endurance, getting that score back, and then tweaking prep a little bit more before they take it again. So practice tests in between the real test can be really helpful. Now, there's a couple ways kids can report their scores. There's something called score choice. That's when kids are allowed to pick the scores they want to send. Maybe they took it twice, but one time didn't go so well, but the second time it was great. They can send those scores from the second time only. Some schools will want to see all scores, but not a lot of schools do that anymore. There's also something called super scoring. This is when the school cherry picks the highest sub-scores. So let's say your student got a 500 on math and a 600 on the reading section in the SAT the first time, and the second time they get a 600 in math and a 500 in reading. The college will say, oh, you got a 600 in math and a 600 in reading when I super score these and cherry pick your best score. So now you have a 1200. That's a lot better than 1100. But check the school's websites on these policies. So here's the thing. A lot of schools are saying, you know what? We don't even need test scores anymore. They're not requiring the SAT or ACT. They're called test optional schools. And you can find a list on this website called fairtest.org. Check the school's websites for details specifically though. For example, some schools will say, oh yeah, we're test optional, but you have to be above a 3.5 to apply test optional. Or like George Mason was one of the first colleges in the area to go test optional. They'll say, yeah, but if you're looking at math programs or engineering, excuse me, we want to see test scores. Interestingly, last year, 70% of kids applying to test optional schools still submitted a score. So why does all this matter? Well, for most kids, as you saw from the very first slide, test scores still matter a lot. You want your child to score to his or her potential. For example, if your child's coming in with a 23 on the ACT, but really they can be a 26 kid, you want them to be a 26 kid because just those 3 points put them in another category of schools. It's a significant difference. And it's the one thing kids can control. They can't go back and, become a leader when they weren't before. They can't go back and fix their grades their sophomore year or their freshman year, but they can put the time into improving their test score. And it's a small increase that can actually make a really big difference. So the senior year, take the test one final time. If you need to, you can take it in the summer or really early fall the senior year. But for most kids, they say, I just want to be done my junior year. I don't want to think about this anymore my senior year. And for good reason. That's when kids are finishing their applications. And for kids that are applying early decision or early action, they're due November 1st. So it's pretty stressful those first few months of the fall. I'm going to wrap up, but I wanted to mention accommodations. So what are accommodations? That's when a student has a documented disability, like maybe a learning disability or perhaps ADHD, and they've used this accommodation in school. They can apply for something like extended time or small group testing or use of a computer. But again, they have to have it documented and they already have to use it in school. But the accommodations can be helpful. Now, a lot of times kids say, I like the straightforwardness of the ACT, but boy, it is fast. Well, if you have time and a half and you can remove the obstacle of being fast, the ACT is often the way to go for most kids with accommodations. But you want to start the process early and speak to your child's counselor. So here are my takeaways. It's worth taking the time to find your best test. It takes a little bit more time up front, but it cuts down on prep significantly because you're only preparing for one test. You want to pair your dates. Maybe the ACT February or April or April, June, the March or May for the SAT. But far and away, you want to prioritize schoolwork over test prep because, as we've said, grades are most important. And remember, testing too often typically doesn't pay off, especially when it's too early as well, because test scores peak in the spring of a student's junior year. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me at any time. Happy to answer. You can reach me at ann@ectutoring.com, and my office number is 703-934-8282. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Have a great day.